Hi, everyone. So I've had a lot to think about with our face-to-face meeting and our 2 weeks worth of readings. And so I'll talk about my three key takeaways first. The first aha moment, key takeaway that I had was the article in talking about switching from completion as a goal or an agenda to changing student beliefs. And I remember when I first started working in community colleges and we started talking a lot about completion and why it's so important. And I remember thinking to myself, well, sure, completion is important, but are we taking into account all the reasons why students don't complete a degree at a community college? For example, I myself personally have met a lot of students who are only looking to take one or two classes because they already have a career and they just want to brush up on a few skills to move up within that current career. I've also met students who come in and they work towards some of our ready to work degrees, and a company comes along and offers them a great job and they say, okay, you don't have to finish the degree, come grow with us. Well, who are we to tell those students, no, you shouldn't do that, you should turn down this job, you should finish your welding degree or finish your HVAC degree? I'm not sure that that's necessarily the message we should be sending. A lot of our students come in and they want to transfer to a 4-year school, and sometimes they don't want to wait till they finish that associate's degree. And again, given that a lot of the places I've been in don't necessarily have super strong transfer pathways where every single class they took with us is going to transfer, who are we to tell those students, no, 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 you should wait, you should finish this whole associate's degree and then transfer? So I really enjoyed reading about the perspective of changing from completion as an agenda to changing student beliefs. And that really ties back to the discussion that we had in the face-to-face portion, where we were really talking about digging down into that why. So for a lot of students, if you ask them what their why is, I want to get a good job. Everybody does, but really digging down deeper and finding that why, that bedrock reason that's going to allow you to continue even when things get really, really, really tough. And we all know that times are tough for everybody. So I really loved this notion of changing from, yes, of course, completion is important. Again, I'm in a state where completion is now tied to our funding, completing a certificate, completing a degree, but changing more to this notion of let's look at what student beliefs are and changing their beliefs, and the completion will follow if you do that. My second key takeaway, my second aha moment, was in the article on becoming a student ready college. I was working at a college and I can remember they called this big meeting together of all the administrators in the college. And we were talking about, or they were talking at us about how we were going to become a student ready college. And they split us up into groups to work on becoming a student ready college. Except I remember sitting there with a table full of administrators and we're all looking at each other and going, well, what's a student ready college? We thought we were a student ready college. It was never explained to us what they meant by student ready college or why it was important to become a student ready college. And it was really interesting to me because long after I've left now, I realized that I was at a college that was a student ready college, or at least it was making very big strides trying to get there. Georgia Highlands College, down in Cartersville, Georgia. In 2023, they made the top 25 Aspen Prize for Community College finalists. For 2025, the cycle that's coming up, they are already in the top 150. That school worked really hard to become a student ready college. Everything we did at that school was through the lens of the students. We worked on high impact practices. I was a part of the group that created a year-long faculty learning community to put high impact practices into our courses. I myself created an undergraduate research lab, which was a high impact practice. In addition to high impact practices, we started things like, for example, an SI program, supplemental instruction program designed to help students succeed in our STEM courses. We started something I called the STEM space, which was it was a classroom that I commandeered. I got the campus dean to give it to me permanently. We put snacks in there, whiteboards in there, comfy furniture in there. I put all sorts of fun posters on the walls. And then I leveraged all of my social and political capital amongst my fellow faculty and got them all to donate their office hours to do them in the STEM space so that a student could go in and get help from any math professor. And each of the tables had a little placard on it that said what subject that person was able or available to help in. So I had a math table, I had a biology table, I had a chemistry table, I had a physics table, geology, and all of that was done with primarily no money. And all of that was done based on leveraging social capital amongst faculty. And I look back on it now, and we were amongst the lowest paid faculty in the entire state, probably the entire nation, I'm sure. Very low paid, had no budget. But there was this us against them mentality where we were going to do everything we could for our students, and we focused everything we did through the student lens. There was a lot of, well, we're better than KSU, our nearby four-year school partner, because there was this competition. Like we were going to support our students more than anybody else. And that really led to this camaraderie and this, pulling together of people. And it made us a really solid example of a student ready college because everything we did was through the lens of the student versus some of the other colleges I've been at that have been better funded and have had more money. But there isn't this necessarily this notion of becoming a student ready college. In fact, that leads me to my third key takeaway or aha moment, which was this whole belief in students. Because I think we've all been there. We've all blamed K through 12 for some of our problems. I know I myself have, I can remember watching on the news and a local school was on the news because they told their teachers they couldn't give students a 0 for not turning work in. The lowest grade they could give was a 50 because a 0 wasn't fair. And I can remember thinking that was the worst idea I'd ever heard. So, we've all been there blaming K through 12 for producing students who aren't ready, for grade inflation, for giving students 4.0 when we don't really think they deserve a 4.0. We've been there, right? Or we've blamed students for being lazy and unwilling to put the work in. I know when I was in the classroom, I've caught myself doing that. I've caught myself making judgment calls about when a student tells me why they can't come to class, about whether or not that's a good enough excuse or a good enough reason. So this whole notion of kind of changing your beliefs in students and understanding that no, our students aren't lazy. Maybe they are unprepared. That might be true, right? We might have students that come to us that aren't really college ready, but you have to teach the students you have, not the students you want to have. And this whole notion of changing the perception that students aren't capable of completing college, that I think was a really, really big kind of aha takeaway moment for me. And then finally, I want to talk about, kind of how would I address the culture changes and challenges. I find myself in a really interesting position. I know you've all heard me say this and you've all heard me mention this before, but I'm going to say it again. I was hired into this role because I was an outsider. I was told multiple times, we want changes. We want to see things be different. And we brought you in because you're fresh eyes, because you're brand new. But I'm finding that despite that, it's hard and very slow going to make changes in a place because even though they expressed this idea that they were really ready for changes, they're not. Like nobody wants someone to come in and say, well, you've been doing this wrong. Let's do this differently. So I've worked really, really hard to avoid making changes in a way that puts a judgment on things, right? That, oh, you were doing it wrong before. So let me come in and show you the way to do it right. No, instead, I've tried to frame my changes. It is very specific reasons for why I've changed things. So one of the first things that I did was I changed how our part-time faculty orientation went. And I framed it as I'm changing this for two reasons. Number one, our budget is really small and we can't afford the lunch that we normally give. So we need to shrink the time commitment down. Instead of Saturday 9 a.m. to 2 p.m., let's make it 9 a.m. to noon since we can't afford to buy them lunch. I also framed it as, well, let's make it better for the part-timers themselves, right? We're not paying them to come to this. So we really need to shrink this down as much as we can. For the spring session, I'm eyeing an evening session for those that can't make a Saturday. I know a lot of them have jobs, right? Outside lives. I worked to put the orientation online in a Blackboard shell for those who can't come. I've also, on the full-time side of the house, worked really hard. I'm a big believer in lead by example. I'm really frustrated with leaders who do as I say, not as I do. So with full-time faculty, I've worked really hard to slowly change the culture by modeling the behavior I want to see. So one of the things that I've done is work really hard to make sure that I am collecting their input in everything that I do. For example, when I'm creating professional development opportunities for them, I send out surveys, anonymous. They give them an opportunity to weigh in on some of the proposed topics as well as suggest their own topics. I've worked to make sure they know that there's support for them if they want to offer a session, if they have an area of expertise and they want to offer a professional development session to their fellow faculty. I've worked really hard to get to know them. I've walked around, knocked on doors, introduced myself, not just to the faculty, but to the staff and administrators in other areas, right? Make sure I'm kind of putting my finger on the pulse of the college, make sure I'm understanding the culture of Lakeland. If I'm going to make changes, I have to really first have a deep understanding of what the current culture is. So I've worked really hard to model behavior I want to see. I've worked really hard to get to know people. I've worked really hard to make sure I'm not making judgment calls, that I'm not, looking at this in my own mind and thinking, well, you do this wrong. Let me show you how to do it the right way. Let me show you how to do it the Aaron Schufer way. And so when it comes to addressing culture changes and challenges, I think that's the way you have to go about it. You have to go about it with a very gentle and delicate touch. But even with that gentle and delicate touch, change still needs to happen. And I've had this conversation with multiple faculty that, in the business world, things change very rapidly. In higher education, things change at a glacial pace. If we want to survive, we're going to have to make some changes. We can't continue going on the way that we've always gone on. And that is not a judgment call on whether or not we've been doing things right or wrong. That is simply pointing out that the world has changed. The generations coming behind us have changed. And we really need to adapt to their needs and the needs of the community if we want to stay useful and important and viable. So those are kind of my ideas about how I would go about changing the culture, as well as my three key takeaways. And I just want to say thank you so much for these readings, because some of them are really interesting. And as I'm reading through them, I'm going, yes, yes, that. So it's been really enjoyable going through this material so far. And thank you so much for listening.